When I think back to my time in high school history class, which was some time ago now, I can only recall being quizzed on lists of names and dates. I think most people probably have a similar experience where the thought of history evokes images of a painful death via boredom. Yet, as they say, truth is stranger than fiction, and within history lies some of the greatest stories one could imagine. It's strange to me that the typical American education doesn't better harness the power of story. Perhaps if it did, kids would grow up to be adults with a natural curiosity for the past. Like many young adults, I lost my interest for reading in my early 20s, that is, if I ever had one to begin with. I don't really recall what turned me back on to books, but I can tell you that since then I've always gravitated towards nonfiction, as there is just an extra appeal when I read something knowing it actually happened. The only problem is, many nonfiction books suffer from the same affliction as your junior year American history teacher. They're an absolute bore. I've never been shy about not finishing a book. Life is too short to slog through books you don't like, but I probably DNF more nonfiction books than fiction. The ideal nonfiction book can be found at that rare intersection of truth and humanity. One such book is Helen Zia's Last Boat Out of Shanghai. So, Last Boat Out of Shanghai, let's talk about it. Probably in my top 3 favorite books that I've read in 2022. More than any other reason, the author does such a good job of storytelling because this book follows 4 different characters, and the characters are all living roughly around the Shanghai region, roughly around the same time period, but they are independent of one another. They don't know each other, and their stories are very interesting because each character has a vastly different background. There are some who are very privileged, there are some who have extremely difficult lives from an early age, and I think this was a really important read for me because a lot of times people think of life in other countries as homogenous. If you live in China, you live one lifestyle. If you live in Italy, you live another lifestyle. But just like life in any country, there are those who are extremely privileged. There are those who are in the orphan system, essentially. So this was a great reminder that the human experience can be ubiquitous, regardless of the time period or the region of the world that you're living in. And the things that were happening in China during this time were so insane that it didn't matter what your status or your class or your station in life was, you were going to be extremely impacted by what was happening. And this is something that's not really talked about in American education because during World War II era, all the conversation is around the war in Europe, the Holocaust, and the Pacific Theater, which was essentially just the war with Japan. But China at the time was being ruled by Japan. There had been colonization attempts from the English, the Americans, French, Germany. So there were small communities from those countries set up that all had their influence. And then, of course, the Chinese government itself was undergoing a civil war between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists and Mao Zedong's communists. So the civilians in China never really knew what was going to happen next, who was going to be making the rules, what was going to be allowed, what wasn't going to be allowed. It was such a chaotic time to live in, and it's so rarely talked about. For me, this book was just an absolute gem to really learn more about this time period in this region. Because previously I've only read The Rape of Nanking, which has to do with the Nanking massacre, which is an important topic, but it was a much more acute happening during this time period where this is a little bit more broad, spanning from the 30s to the 50s, and really dialing down into the personal experience of these individuals rather than talking about a mass event. The book is extremely readable, not just because of its great storytelling, but the writing is never overly verbose or intentionally obtuse or opaque. So if you're looking for a great nonfiction that really scratches that good storytelling itch, I think this is probably a good book for you. Now, reading Last Boat has really reinforced the idea that I should be reading more varied works from various parts of the world, from various authors, rather than just native English English speakers or American stories or kind of European type stories. And so this has inspired me to put together a list of one book from every country in the world. I'm going to start working my way through that. Of course, this is not an idea that I've come up with on my own. There are other people who have done this type of challenge. I'm not putting any personal time limit on it. However, if you want to learn more about that project, the list I'm compiling, as well as what I'm learning about the world just from putting together the list, check out this video right here. I think you'll find it very interesting, and I would love it if you gave me your thoughts on my list, and if maybe you picked up a couple and we read them together. I'm Anthony on Life, and you will see me in the next video.